The First Elves dwelt for a long time under the stars, named the Quendi being the first to make speech. The elves were said to have awoken in the making of the stars and in the midmost of the world in Cuiviénen. This is probably why we don't hear much about elf children. They were said to have traditions concerning the awakening during the waking of their first Hroar from the flesh of Arda when the Quendi slept in the womb of Arda. However, the first elves didn't wake together. 3 elf men waked first, and in the earliest traditions, they were named Imin, Tata, and Enel, awaking in that order. There was not much time between each one. They saw the stars first, and were so enamored of their beauty and were eager to start forming words. Thus, they were impatient, so they woke up their spouses, becoming Imin and Iminye, Tata and Tatiye, and Enel, walking together, leaving the green dell of their waking. Imin claimed to have the right of first choice of companions as he was the oldest, and thus he chose 12 companions. Tata claimed the right to second choice and chose 18 companions. And finally, Enel claimed the right to third choice and chose 24 companions. And they continued the same cycle of choosing the companions, the elf men waking and waking their spouses, mostly reckoning in 12s, with 144 their highest number. As a result, the companions of Imin contained 14, being the smallest company, while the companions of Tata contained 56, and the companions of Enel contained 74 total. This was said to have occurred at 1,000 valiant years in the First Age. Oromë rode eastward and was amazed by the Quendi, naming them Eldar. The most ancient songs of the elves started in Cuiviénen and echoed in the west and were mainly about a dark ride. Thus, Melkor hated the riding of Oromë, and so he sent dark servants as riders so the Quendi would shun Oromë, one of the Valar. This was why many of the Quendi were filled with dread at the coming of Oromë. However, Oromë stayed a while before riding back over the land and sea to Valinor, bringing the tidings to Valmar, speaking of the shadows that troubled Cuiviénen. Manwë sought the counsel of Ilúvatar in Taniquetil and revealed it to the Valar. We should take up again the mastery of Arda at whatsoever cost, and deliver the Quendi from the shadow of Melkor. While Aule was grieved, foreboding the hurts of the world that must come from the strife, the Valar were made ready for this task, in order to assault the fortresses of Melkor and make an end. Melkor had never forgotten this moment ever since, that the elves were a main cause of his downfall. After the Valar set a guard over Cuiviénen, they had held a council. Thus, the Quendi knew nothing of the siege of Utumma. Some had said that the Quendi should be free to walk as they would in Middle-earth, while others feared for their dangers in the deceits of the starlit dusk. However, they were enamored by the elves, desiring their fellowship, and thus the Valar summoned the Quendi to Valinor. Oromë was sent to them, choosing who should go to Valinor, and decided ultimately on Ingwe, Finwë, and Elwë, but the elves refused to summon, preferring to remain in Middle-earth to the trees of Avari the Unwilling. The fighting is also said to have occurred around 1090 valiant years, or 90 valiant years after the awakening. The elves had a great march into the west, the March of the Quendi, which occurred in 1125 valiant years. Years later, the 3 kindreds of Eldar were gathered in Valinor. Meanwhile, Fëanor, son of Finwë, was a craftsman who created the Silmarils. They could be seen as a machine in a similar category of the One Ring. They were the 3 jewels that were filled with light, made with the crystalline substance Selima. After its creation, Melkor started to have a lust for them as the radiance caused a fire in his heart. Meanwhile, Fëanor refused to give them up as the Valar asked, as they knew that the men and elves were coming. Fëanor believed Melkor's lie that Valinor would be diminished and eventually partook in kinslaying. The Valar were grieved, and Fëanor chose to remain evil. The Valar resolved to illumine Middle-earth with light in order to hinder the deeds of Melkor. Thus, the sun and moon were guided by Arion and Tilion, respectively. The sun was a sign of the awakening of men and the waning of the elves, while the moon cherishes their memory. The First Age ended with a great battle, when the host of Valinor broke Thangorodrim and overthrew Morgoth. The Second Age involved the dark years for the men of Middle-earth. Many of the elves still remained, with most dwelling in Lindon west of the arid Luin. The Sindar passed eastward, and some established realms in forests far away. They were mainly called Sylvan Elves, and were very unfriendly to the dwarves. Celeborn and Galadriel dwelt in Lindon for a time, along with Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves, and some of the Noldor. The Noldor were not as unfriendly to the dwarves as the Sindar. While Elrond, half-elven, chose to be immortal, his twin brother Elros, much like Arwen, chose the fate of immortal man, thus starting the line of Elros. They would live about 3 to 5 times as long, on average, as Middle-earth men. Sauron began to stir again in Middle-earth in 500 of the Second Age. The Númenóreans grew, and he was afraid, so he had made Mordor into a stronghold, beginning the building of Barad-dûr 500 years later. This would lead to his invasion of Eregion. In 1200 of the Second Age, Sauron wanted to seduce the Eldar, but was rejected by Gil-galad. The Elven smiths had reached the height of their skill in 1500 of the Second Age, and so they started forming the Three Rings of Power. While Celebrimbor initially fell for it, he later noticed Sauron's motives to get the Three Rings of Power held by the elves. Eregion laid waste in 1697 of the Second Age, and Celebrimbor was slain by Sauron. However, 2 years after that, Sauron would overrun Eriador. He would corrupt the Númenóreans after being taken as a prisoner to Númenor as he seduced the king. It wasn't until 3441 of the Second Age when Sauron was overthrown by Elendil and Gil-galad, and Isildur takes the One Ring. This also marked the ending of the Second Age and started the Third Age. The Third Age marked the fading years of the Eldar. They did not attempt anything new, continuing to live in memory of the past as the dwarves hid themselves guarding their hoards as Sauron slept and the One Ring was lost. Isildur would plant a seedling of the White Tree in Minas Anor. However, he and his 3 elder sons were soon slain in the disaster of the Gladden Fields. However, 1,000 years later, the Istari, or wizards, would come in the shape of men in order to contest the power of Sauron. They had tried to resist him, despite having many powers. They were forbidden to match power with power or to seek to dominate elves or men by force and fear. Furthermore, the guardianship of the Three Rings were at the time known only to those who possessed them. This led to the forming of the White Council in 2463 of the Third Age. Not too long after, in 2480 of the Third Age, the Orcs started to make secret strongholds in the Misty Mountains, and Sauron brought them into Moria. The Orcs would rather enter into the Shire, which Elrond's sons fought with the Dunedain. And lastly, about a few hundred years before the War of the Ring, Elrond's wife, Celebrian, was journeying to Lorien, and she was waylaid in the Redhorn Pass and was assaulted by the Orcs. She was rescued by Elladan and Eruhir, but had already suffered torment before they came to her rescue. She was brought back to Rivendell and healed by Elrond, but she had lost all delight in Middle-earth and sailed west to Valinor. All the elves, much like Celebrian, would eventually sail west as they had a spiritual call from the Valar to do so since the beginning, and this held true during and after the War of the Ring as well.